Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. People may have heard about this film that some idiots have released, which supposedly depict a Shia view of some of the Sahaba. Understandably, there is a lot of anger from many Sunni scholars and lay people. I would like to request my fellow Sunni brothers and sisters to hold back their anger and hatred, because these events we are witnessing may not be what they seem. There are hidden agendas at play, which we can only understand if we look at the wider geopolitical context. Stoking up hatred, enmity and fighting between Sunnis and Shias is in the interest of the enemies of Islam, the age-old tactic of divide and conquer. We Sunnis need to wake up and stop reacting to events that are designed to provoke us and serve the interest of our enemies. How long are we going to fall into the same traps, act predictably like mindless hotheads, let our enemies press our buttons each time? We need to understand that the USA and Israel have been set against the Islamic Republic of Iran ever since the revolution. They got their stooge Saddam Hussein to go to war against Iran straight after the revolution, which went on for 8 bloody years, all in an attempt to cripple the Islamic regime. In 2006, Israel was humiliated in front of the world as it was forced to withdraw from Lebanon by the Iranian-backed Hezbollah. The whole Muslim world, Sunnis and Shias, were jubilant at the success of the Shia Hezbollah in repelling the Israeli army. Since that time, we have seen the US-Israeli alliance using various Wahhabi-inspired Khawarij groups to wage war against the Shias. Led by the long-time US stooges in the region, the Saudis, who have a regional rivalry with the Iranians, but also a Wahhabi-inspired hatred of all Shias. Most recently, the Saudis have been at the forefront of proxy wars against Iran, especially in Yemen, which the Saudis have completely destroyed, causing misery to millions of Muslims, with the help of American and British weapons. It was no coincidence that Donald Trump's first visit upon taking up office was to Saudi Arabia, where he signed the biggest single deal in history worth $200 billion, promising to continue the flow of weapons so that the Saudis have plenty of bombs to continue the massacre of Muslims. My fellow Sunni brothers and sisters, keep an eye on what is going on in the world and think about who is benefiting from these events. Refrain from directing anger against our Shia brothers and sisters. Yes, I say Shia brothers and sisters, because the Sunni ulama never said that the Shia are disbelievers. Most of the various Shia groups, including the majority 12 Shias of modern-day Iran, despite holding some beliefs regarding the companions that are repugnant to Sunnis, nevertheless remain within the fold of Islam. For decades now, the Saudis and other groups inspired by Wahhabi teachings have been aggressively spreading the propaganda that Shias are outside the fold of Islam. This is not correct, and it is not the position of the majority of Sunni scholars. By way of example, if we look at the work of famous 11th century Shafi scholar Abu Mansur al-Baghdadi, in his work Al-Farq Bayn al-Firaq, the difference between the sects, he clearly places most of the various Shia groups under the umbrella of Islam. Therefore, if Shias are Muslims, they fall under the general ruling of all Muslims, as the noble Prophet ﷺ stated, Al-Muslim akhul Muslim, la yadhlimuhu wa la yakhdhuluhu wa la yakdhibuhu wa la yahqiru. Kullul Muslim alal Muslim haram, damuhu wa maluhu wa irdu. The Muslim is the brother of a Muslim. He does not wrong him or betray him or lie to him or look down on him. The whole of a Muslim is sacred to another Muslim, his blood, his property and his honor. This is Sahih and narrated by Muslim. This is how we have been commanded to deal with other Muslims. Of course, we Sunnis hate the things that some Shias say and believe about some Sahaba, namely Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Aisha radiallahu anhum, and others. But this does not mean that they are not Muslim, and that they do not have the full rights that are due to Muslim. If we look at the roots of the Shia movement, it begins when some individuals who were fanatic about Ali and his descendants started to criticize the first three Khalifas and talk bad about them, as they felt that Ali was the rightful successor to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. According to our Sunni sources, Ali never spoke badly of Abu Bakr or Umar. Even the famous Imam of Ahlul Bayt, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, the great grandson of Hussein radiallahu anhu, who is accepted by both Sunnis and Shias alike. According to Sunni sources, when some individuals in his company said things rejecting Abu Bakr and Umar, he stopped them and reprimanded them. That is why the early Shia were known as Rafida, i.e. rejectors, because they rejected the first two Khalifas. Now, to fully understand what is going on today, it is necessary to be aware of the fact that there is a sect in Islam that is far more dangerous than the Shia. And this sect is present among the Ummah today, but not many Muslims are aware of it. And many sincere Sunni Muslims fall into its teachings without even realizing. This particular sect is known as the Khawarij and is so dangerous in its deviant beliefs that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam warned against it in the most severe terms. To understand today's Saudi and Salafi jihadi war against the Shia, we need to know about the origins of Wahhabism and Kharijism. I have previously written an article on this subject relating to ISIS. The link is below. I am in the process of finishing a further piece of research and will be publishing it soon, inshallah, which goes into more depth and exposes the Khariji Wahhabi movement and its relationship to various contemporary groups and movements. This is important because, as I said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam issued severe warnings regarding this sect, and obviously for good reason. The Khawarij are the most dangerous of deviant sects. The Khawarij are the most dangerous of deviant sects because they make takfir of other Muslims who do not follow their teachings. By takfir, I mean declare other Muslims to be disbelievers. Then, if they have the military capacity, they go about declaring jihad against those Muslims and cause civil strife, bloodshed and massacre of innocent Muslims that they have declared to be kuffar. This is the repeating pattern of all Khawarij groups. It begins with the takfir, declaring other Muslims to be disbelievers, either because of committing major sins, which they believe is kufr, or doing things that they label as shirk. The next stage of taking the sword against them only comes about if they have the means to do so. Many of the Saudi scholars and many other groups who describe themselves as Salafis today, whether they are jihadis or not, trace their intellectual roots to 18th century preacher from the Najd, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and the movement he inspired, the Wahhabi movement. There is no doubt, not even the slightest doubt, that Ibn Abdul Wahhab was a Khariji. In fact, he was from the more extreme Khariji preachers that have appeared throughout Islamic history. From day one, the Wahhabis had a particular hatred towards Shias, whom Ibn Abdul Wahhab is accused of being the first to bring shirk into the Ummah. But they also accused whole masses of normal Muslims of being mushrikeen, i.e. polytheists. They declared that any Muslim who visits the grave of a wali is a grave worshipper and hence a disbeliever. Not only that, they declared that all those who live in lands where such practices take place, unless they clearly and openly disassociate from them, are also disbelievers. By this extremist logic, they declared the Ottomans and all those who lived in the Ottoman Empire to be disbelievers. Soon they took up the sword and began the killing of both Sunni and Shia Muslims in Arabia in their attempt to spread their Khariji Wahhabi doctrines and enforce them on other Muslims. This was the beginnings of Wahhabism. Many groups today and many Muslims, without even realizing it, are influenced by the Wahhabi, hence Khariji teachings and mindset. The Saudis in particular have also regarded Iran as a regional geopolitical rival. So the Wahhabi fanaticism of their scholars can be utilized to provide religious justification for their proxy wars. As we indicated, the wider context is serving US-Israeli interests in the region. Having understood all of this, we can now understand that when we see events like this film release, which serves nothing but to stoke up Sunni-Shia conflict and serve the Saudi Khariji narrative, we must ask ourselves from where these filmmakers have come from, who is funding them, and so on. We know that the leaders of the mainstream Shia groups have distanced themselves from this. And in fact, many of the foremost Shia scholars and leaders of the Islamic Revolution have for many years been issuing fatwas and statements forbidding Shias from insulting Sahaba and wives of the Prophet ﷺ, whom the Sunnis hold in great respect. These Shia scholars have been trying to move towards friendly relations with their Sunni brethren. Say what you like about the Iranians, but they are not stupid. They realize the strategy of the US-Israeli intelligence agencies has been to provoke a general Sunni-Shia conflict across the region as a way of containing Iran. The Americans have identified the Khariji Wahhabi elements, the Saudis, as well as the so-called Salafist jihadis, as the natural Shia haters and obvious groups to be covertly supported and funded to carry out this objective. For this strategy to work, it is important for the Khawarij elements to remain disguised within the larger Sunni majority so that they can spread their toxic doctrines without being suspected. Following the invasion of Iraq by US and UK in 2003 and the removal of their one-time stooge Saddam Hussein, the security situation in Iraq deteriorated. It was the Khariji Salafist jihadi groups that began a campaign of bomb attacks against civilian Shia populations. The supreme Shia religious leader in Iraq, Ayatollah Sistani, repeatedly forbade his followers from retaliating against fellow Sunnis. Remember, the Shias were in the majority in Iraq, so it was not out of fear. In November 2004, one Shia leader begged Sistani to call on Shia militias to fight back. Sistani replied quietly, "Please don't do this. Please be civilized. We don't want to start a civil war. This is the most important point." The man, whose name was Bahrul Ulum, bowed to Sistani's wish. During the ensuing months of bombings and bloodshed, and even in the aftermath of the destruction of the Shia Askariya shrine in Samarra in February 2006, Sistani repeated his counsel. Shia clerics and preachers in turn repeated his words in their sermons across Iraq, and once again most Shias heeded his call, even after the shock of the Samarra bombing. After every bombing, the Shia mosques associated with Sistani would tell their congregations that it was not their Sunni neighbors who were killing them, but foreign Wahhabis. Please see my article for full referencing of this and other issues that I have touched upon today. The link is below. Therefore, I call upon all Sunni Muslim scholars and educated Sunni Muslims to refresh their knowledge of the history of the Khawarij and the Wahhabi movements and the great harm they can cause by legitimizing the bloodshed of Muslims, not just Shias, but eventually they turn against all those who disagree with their narrow extremist teachings. I will be publishing an article soon, inshallah, which will provide more details into the historic and more recent developments of the Khawarij movements and help to shed more light on this important area. Remember, the Sunnis vastly outnumber the Shia worldwide. Therefore, it is for us, the Sunnis, who have the power on our side to extend the hand of peace towards the Shia brethren. Wallahu a'lam, and Allah knows best. Wassalamu alaikum.